So recently, I've been getting into collecting physical versions of my favorite albums. Then I thought, what's a better way to listen to them than on my MP3 player? Or should I say, video game console? Hi, I'm Francis from Broken Tech, and I used my Sony PSP as a dedicated audio player for a week in 2024. So, you might be wondering, why would you need a dedicated audio player in this age of music streaming services like Spotify or Apple Music? Perhaps you want to support your favorite artists and buy their music directly. Maybe you simply want to ditch music streaming services altogether and feel like you actually own your music. Or if you're like me, you simply just have a physical album collection collecting dust in your room somewhere. Whatever the case may be, is the PSP sufficient enough in becoming your next dedicated audio player? Now, to answer that question, first I had to get my old computer that still has a CD drive, rip my favorite albums one at a time, pray that the music ripping software detects the album on its database, because if not, I have to manually assign metadata to each of the tracks, get my PSP's memory stick and put it into a card reader, plug the card reader into my PC, drag and drop the ripped MP3 files to the music directory of the PSP, place the memory stick back into the PSP, and we have music playing on the PSP. Believe it or not, this process is actually simpler than it looks. Other MP3 players of the time needed proprietary software like iTunes for the iPod in order to upload music onto them. And I really like the PSP in contrast to that. Because whenever I have new music, I just have to simply drag and drop them onto the music directory of my memory stick. Oh, and while we're on the topic of the music listening experience, who could resist liking the built-in visualizers of the music player app? It's giving me old Windows Media Player vibes, and it's really telling of the era of when this device was made. Lastly, and a bit of on the nerdy side, another thing I like about the PSP is its built-in DAC, or digital to analog converter. Now, I have yet to verify this myself, but according to a website that lists its technical specifications, the PSP uses a Wolfson DAC, the same DAC found on the iPod Classic 5.5 Gen, renowned by collectors for having outstanding audio quality. Why is this important, you may ask? Well, having a good DAC means that the PSP will be able to utilize better sounding audio gear like these IEMs, for example. Unfortunately, using the PSP as a music player today really brings you back to a time when listening to music on the go wasn't as mainstream. And I mostly say this because it lacks features that we take for granted nowadays. For starters, you can't even shuffle your entire music library. You can only shuffle tracks if they're in the same folder, and I'll get to why I find this feature, or lack thereof, important. And to add to that, you can't sort tracks by artist or genre, or even make playlists. Another thing I noticed is how outdated putting this thing on standby is. To put the PSP on standby, you first have to hold the brightness key to turn the screen off, then slide the power slider downwards to put the PSP on hold mode. It really puts into perspective how putting our phones on standby nowadays is literally done by a push of a button. Now, in spite of the pros and cons, is using the PSP as a music player in 2024 really worth it? Well, there's this one feature that really stood out to me. Let me introduce to you SensMe. Remember how I mentioned earlier that I find the lack of a shuffle feature important? Well, the reason I say this is because of a thing I heard from a DankPods video recently.
What I like to do is to press shuffle and discover music. So on my old school iPods, I just have it on shuffle, and if I hear a song that I like, I'd give it 5 stars. And basically, it's me trying to listen to all the music I've got in there and find all the gems.
Yes, I wanted a shuffle feature so that I can find the hidden gems of my music library. But what if I told you that SensMe is shuffle, but on steroids? Let me explain. The way SensMe works is it categorizes your music library into 12 different channels based on the mood that it thinks your music has. Pick a channel, and it plays the music tracks of that channel in a shuffled order. Feel like cycling? Pick the upbeat channel. Feel like relaxing after a long day's work? Pick the lounge channel, and so on. There's even a channel which recommends you music based on time of day, if you really don't know what to listen to. In a way, SensMe is kind of like a precursor to modern recommendation algorithms like Spotify DJ. The only difference is that it recommends you music from a library that you already own, so it doesn't make it feel like you're being forced to listen to something that you don't want to. Now, after using my PSP as my main music player for the week, would I actually recommend that you go out and buy one primarily to become a music player? Well, probably not. I think you're better off with an iPod Classic, or heck, even a modern day Walkman would do a better job. And I say this mostly because of the hindered user experience. However, if you do have a PSP laying around somewhere and don't know what to do with it, I think using it as a music player would be a fun experiment of some sorts. And I say this especially after having experienced the SensMe function. If I were to redo this project though, I'd probably go with the PSP Go model just because it's more portable and it supports Bluetooth, so I could have probably hooked it up with AirPods or something. Anyway, with that being said, I'm Francis from Broken Tech and thank you very much for watching our first video on the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.